Tonight feels different, not because something dramatic is about to happen, not because there's a plan or a speech or a moment rehearsed in advance. It feels different because for the first time in a long time, I'm not negotiating with myself. I'm not weighing comfort against honesty. I'm not calculating outcomes. I'm not asking fear for permission. Tonight, I stop hiding. Hiding doesn't always look like silence. Sometimes it looks like composure, like emotional intelligence, like knowing exactly how much of yourself to show and when to pull back. I've been good at that. Good at staying just inside the line where nothing can fully touch me. Good at being present without being exposed. Good at keeping my inner world private enough that no one could rearrange it without my consent. I told myself it was maturity, but maturity doesn't feel like constriction. I didn't realize how much I was hiding until I noticed how tired I'd become. Not tired from effort, tired from restraint, from holding things back that wanted to be real, from editing myself in moments that deserved honesty, from choosing neutrality where truth quietly waited. That kind of hiding drains you slowly. The strange thing is, nothing forced this moment. There was no ultimatum, no crisis, no breaking point. Just accumulation. Moments that mattered stacking up inside me. Words that deserved daylight lingering too long in the dark. A growing awareness that staying hidden was no longer protecting anything, it was distorting it. I realized something uncomfortable tonight. Hiding had stopped being about safety. It had become about control. Control over how much I revealed. Control over how deeply things could go. Control over whether I could leave untouched if I ever needed to. That control felt smart. Until I saw what it was costing me. Because control keeps you intact, but it also keeps you unchanged. And I'm not unchanged anymore. What I feel isn't explosive, it isn't dramatic, it isn't even urgent, it's steady. And steady things don't go away just because you ignore them. I've been pretending this steadiness was temporary, that it would pass if I stayed quiet long enough, that it didn't need acknowledgement to exist. But the truth is, it grew because I didn't interfere with it. It grew because it was real. I noticed how much easier it became to be myself in certain moments, how little effort it took to stay present, how natural it felt to listen without distraction, to speak without performance, to exist without armor. Those moments didn't scare me. What scared me was realizing how rare they were elsewhere. That's when I knew I was hiding, not from someone else, from myself. Hiding from the fact that this mattered more than I expected. Hiding from the reality that I couldn't reduce this to something casual without lying. Hiding from the responsibility that comes when something reaches inside you and rearranges how you move through the world. Tonight, I stopped doing that. Not because I suddenly feel brave, but because hiding has become heavier than honesty. Honesty doesn't mean confession. It doesn't mean forcing clarity or demanding response or collapsing boundaries. Honesty means alignment. It means letting how I behave reflect what I feel. And I haven't been doing that. I've been careful with my words when I should have been accurate, calm when I should have been present, neutral when something deserved weight. That neutrality has been my shield. Tonight, I lower it. Lowering a shield doesn't mean stepping into danger. It means accepting that being seen is part of being alive. I don't know what changes after this. I don't know if things deepen, stabilize, or end. I don't know how honesty will land. I don't know if what I feel will be met, misunderstood, or simply acknowledged. But I know this. Continuing to hide would change me in ways I don't want. It would teach me that comfort is more important than truth. That distance is safer than presence. That it's better to stay composed than to stay real. I've lived that version of myself before. He was intact. He was also lonely in a very quiet way. Tonight isn't about fixing anything. It's about stopping the slow erosion that comes from living half-present. I've realized that hiding doesn't stop pain. It postpones meaning. And postponing meaning is its own kind of loss. If this changes everything, then everything needed to change. Not because things were wrong, but because they were real enough to deserve honesty. I'm not doing this impulsively. I've thought about it longer than I'd like to admit. I've examined every angle, questioned every motive, tested every reason to stay quiet. None of them held up. The truth remains simple. I don't want to look back on this moment and realize I chose silence when presence was possible. I don't want to remember this as something I felt deeply but never honored. I don't want to carry the regret of knowing I hid when I could have shown up honestly. Tonight, I stopped hiding. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deliberately. I let my presence be felt instead of managed. I let moments matter instead of minimizing them. I let myself be seen without demanding certainty. Whatever happens after this will be real. Not shaped by fear, not dulled by avoidance, not delayed by restraint masquerading as wisdom. And if everything changes, then at least it changes honestly. At least it changes with integrity. At least it changes because I finally chose to live aligned with what's true instead of protecting myself from it. Tonight, I stop hiding, even if it changes everything, because not hiding has already changed me. And that part, I'm no longer willing to give up. Part 2. Maintain 1,500 words. What it means to be seen after you stop hiding, the moment after you decide to stop hiding, is never loud. There's no immediate shift in the room, no thunder, no reaction you could point to and say, there, that's when everything changed. What changes first is internal, and that change is irreversible. Once I stopped hiding, I became aware of something I hadn't been before. Visibility, not the kind that comes from attention, the kind that comes from honesty. I realized how much effort I'd been spending making sure I stayed interpretable but unreadable, close enough to feel present, distant enough to remain untouched. I had mastered that balance over years, the balance that lets people know you care without ever letting them see how much. Letting go of that balance felt like stepping into open air. There was relief in it. There was also fear. Being seen isn't scary because of judgment. It's scary because it removes plausible deniability. Before, if something went wrong, I could tell myself I hadn't really been in it, that I kept part of myself reserved, that I'd stayed measured. Now, that narrative was gone. If something shifted, it would shift with me fully present. And that mattered. I noticed how differently I carried myself. I wasn't performing calm anymore. I wasn't calculating tone. I wasn't editing reactions in real time. I was simply there. Presence has weight. When you stop hiding, you feel it immediately. Your words land differently, not heavier, just cleaner. Your silence stops feeling strategic and starts feeling honest. Even your pauses change. They're no longer buffers, they're spaces. Spaces invite response. That realization made me nervous, because response is something you can't control. I'd always believed that hiding gave me agency. But the truth is, hiding only gives you delay. It postpones risk. It postpones clarity. It postpones intimacy. When I stopped hiding, I accepted something I'd been resisting for a long time. I accepted that whatever happens next won't be something I can manage from a distance. That acceptance didn't feel like surrender. It felt like adulthood. There's a difference between being careful and being unavailable. I crossed that line without noticing. I saw it in how often I chose an ambiguity over accuracy, in how I'd used neutrality as a shield, in how I'd stayed emotionally fluent without ever committing to being emotionally present. I wasn't dishonest, but I wasn't transparent either. Dropping hiding meant removing that fog, not by explaining myself, by aligning myself. I didn't suddenly start saying more. I started meaning more. Every word felt intentional, not rehearsed. Intentional. I also noticed how my fear changed shape. Before, fear felt like something external, a reaction to potential outcomes. Rejection, misalignment, loss. Now, fear felt internal. Fear of incongruence. Fear betraying the version of myself that had finally stepped forward. That fear didn't ask me to retreat. It asked me to remain consistent. Consistency is harder than confession. Confession is a moment. Consistency is a posture. When you stop hiding, you don't get to disappear after honesty. You have to live with it. I realized that visibility doesn't end when words are spoken. It continues afterward, in how you show up the next day, in how you respond when things feel undefined, in how you stay open without demanding reassurance. That kind of visibility felt vulnerable, but it also felt clean. I stopped feeling like I was guarding something, and that revealed how much I'd been guarding before. Guarding keeps you intact. It also keeps you separate. I noticed how much closer everything felt. Not emotionally intense, but grounded. As if I'd stepped into the room instead of standing in the doorway. There's something quietly terrifying about that, because once you're fully in the room, leaving requires intention, not drift. Before I could drift. Now I couldn't. I began understanding why I'd hidden for so long. Not because I was afraid of love, because I was afraid of responsibility. responsibility to show up fully, responsibility to be accountable for the impact of my presence, responsibility to let myself be known without guarantee. Hiding lets you care without consequence. Visibility doesn't. I also noticed how stopping hiding changed how I listened. I wasn't waiting for cues anymore. I wasn't scanning for signs. I wasn't interpreting everything like a test. I was just listening. Listening without agenda creates intimacy. Not romantic intimacy, human intimacy. I could feel when moments wanted honesty. Not forced honesty, honest presence. And I didn't avoid those moments anymore. That was new. I'd spent years believing that restraint was wisdom. I learned that restraint without alignment is avoidance. Stopping hiding didn't make me reckless. It made me exact. Exact with my energy. Exact with my attention. Exact with my attention. Exact with my truth. I realized that being seen doesn't mean being exposed. Exposure is involuntary. Being seen is a choice. I was choosing it. That choice didn't guarantee safety. It guaranteed integrity. Integrity is quieter than safety, but it lasts longer. I also understood something else. Once you stop hiding, you stop negotiating with yourself. There's no internal debate about whether to pull back or lean in. You simply show up as you are. That removed a constant tension I hadn't realized was there. The tension of deciding how much of myself was acceptable. Now, whatever was present was present. That didn't mean everything was resolved. It meant everything was honest. I wasn't chasing clarity. I was allowing reality to reveal itself without interference. That's a different kind of courage. The courage to let things be what they are, without buffering, without management, without emotional insurance. I don't know how the story continues. I don't know how she experiences the shift. I don't know whether being seen will bring us closer or simply clarify difference, but I know something essential. I'm no longer hiding behind versions of myself that feel safe but incomplete. I'm here, visible, consistent, and whatever happens next will happen with my full presence involved. That's what it means to be seen after you stop hiding. Not being exposed, being accountable. Accountable to the truth of who you are when something matters. Accountable to the version of yourself you finally stopped abandoning. That's a responsibility I'm willing to carry now, even if it changes everything. Because living unseen had already changed me in ways I didn't want to continue. So I stay, not louder, not bolder, just real. And for the first time, that feels like enough to stand on. Living without the mask after you've taken it off. There's a strange silence that follows the moment you stop hiding. Not the awkward kind, not the empty kind, the honest kind. It surprised me how quiet everything became once the mask was gone. I expected chaos, repercussions. A sense of exposure so sharp it would demand immediate correction. Instead, I felt still. As if my internal noise had been coming from the effort of hiding, not from the truth itself. Living without the mask doesn't make you louder. It makes you clearer. I began to notice how much of my energy had been spent maintaining coherence between who I was and who I appeared to be. That constant micro-adjustment, the recalibration of tone, timing, posture, distance, have been invisible to everyone else, but exhausting to me. When the mask came off, that work stopped. And the space it left behind was spacious. I didn't feel suddenly brave. I felt unburdened. Without the mask, I didn't need to anticipate reactions. I didn't need to manage impressions. I didn't need to soften my presence to keep things comfortable. Comfort had been my camouflage, and camouflage is heavy when you wear it too long. What surprised me most was how little changed externally. Conversations continued, moments unfolded, life moved on, but internally, the shift was unmistakable. I was no longer holding back parts of myself in reserve. Living without the mask doesn't mean revealing everything, at presence revealing accurately. Accuracy replaced performance, and accuracy carries its own confidence. I noticed how differently I responded to uncertainty. Before, uncertainty felt like a problem to solve or avoid. Now, it felt like space open, undefined, but not threatening. That's when I realized something important. The mask wasn't protecting me from uncertainty, it was amplifying it. When you hide, every unknown feels dangerous. When you're honest, unknowns feel neutral. They're just unknown. I also noticed how much kinder I was to myself. Hiding had made me hyper-vigilant, always checking whether I'd revealed too much, always monitoring whether I'd crossed some invisible line. Without the mask, there were no invisible lines, just presence. Presence doesn't overthink itself, it just exists. I became aware of how often I'd been shrinking to fit imagined expectations, how often I'd adjusted myself to stay palatable, how often I'd chosen to be agreeable instead of accurate. Living without the mask meant letting go of that reflex. Not aggressively, naturally. I didn't need to assert myself. I simply didn't erase myself. That distinction mattered. I also noticed how the absence of hiding affected my patience. Before, patience was a strategy, a way to delay decisions, a way to avoid clarity. Now, patience felt grounded, not waiting for something to happen, waiting with myself fully present. There's a difference between patience and postponement. The mask thrives on postponement. Honesty thrives on patience. I stopped feeling the need to rush anything into definition, not because I was avoiding commitment, but because I trusted my presence to speak for itself. Trust is the quiet byproduct of honesty. I also realized that living without the mask made me more resilient. Not because I was tougher, because I was whole. When you're whole, feedback doesn't fracture you. Misunderstanding doesn't dismantle you. Even rejection, while painful, doesn't invalidate you. The mask had made me fragile, because anything that threatened it, that threatened my sense of safety. Without it, I felt anchored. Anchored doesn't mean immovable. It means rooted. I saw how much less reactive I became. I wasn't scanning for signals. I wasn't interpreting every pause. I wasn't filling silence with assumptions. Silence became just silence, not evidence. That was freeing. I also noticed something else. Living without the mask changed how I left moments. Before, I'd leave conversations replaying them, analyzing what I'd said, what I'd withheld, what I should have done differently. Now, I left moments feeling complete. Not perfect. Complete. Completeness doesn't require resolution. It requires presence. I began to understand why I'd avoided this for so long. Because living without the mask requires accountability. You can't blame misalignment on misunderstanding if you've been clear. You can't blame distance on confusion if you've been present. You can't hide behind ambiguity if you've chosen honesty. That accountability felt heavy at first. Then it felt grounding. Grounded people don't need to escape. They know where they stand. I also realized how much hiding had shaped my sense of worth. I'd learned to value myself based on control, based on independence, based on being unaffected. Living without the mask challenged that. It showed me that worth doesn't come from being untouched. It comes from being authentic. Authenticity isn't loud. It's consistent. Consistency gave me confidence I'd never had before. Not the confidence of certainty, the confidence of alignment. Alignment between how I felt and how I behaved, between what mattered to me and how I treated it, between who I was internally and who I allowed myself to be externally. That alignment made decisions simpler, not easier, simpler. I didn't have to ask what's safest. I asked what's honest, honest. Honesty became my reference point, not outcome. I also understood something quietly profound. Living without the mask didn't guarantee connection, but it guaranteed clarity. Clarity doesn't always bring closeness. Sometimes it reveals difference. But difference isn't failure, it's information. And information, when honest, saves you from illusion. I was no longer invested in illusion. I didn't need this to be something it wasn't. I didn't need it to go anywhere specific. I needed it to be real. Real doesn't mean permanent, it means undistorted. I don't know how this story resolves. I don't know what stays and what changes. I don't know what grows or what ends, but I know how I'm living inside it now. Without the mask, without negotiation, without retreat. I'm present, I'm accountable, I'm honest, and whatever happens next will happen with me fully here. That's the cost of living without the mask. You can't disappear quietly anymore. But that's also the gift. You don't lose yourself trying to stay safe. After living this way, I know one thing with certainty. I can never go back to hiding, not because it's wrong, but because now it feels like absence. And I've tasted presence. That's not something you forget. The quiet courage of staying visible. When nothing is certain, there's a different kind of courage that shows up after you stop hiding. It isn't bold, it isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself. It's the courage of staying visible when uncertainty would make retreat easier. And that's where I am now. Once the mask came off, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. Removing the mask was the decision. Living without it is the discipline. Visibility doesn't end with honesty. It begins there. I began to notice how much easier it would be to slip back into old patterns, to soften my presence when things felt undefined, to become emotionally efficient again, to pull back slightly and call it space. Those patterns were familiar, comforting, available at any moment. But now I could feel the difference. Pulling back didn't feel neutral anymore. It felt like erasure. Not dramatic erasure. Subtle. The kind that slowly disconnects you from yourself. Staying visible meant choosing not to disappear when clarity wasn't immediate. It meant letting moments remain open without trying to close them prematurely. It meant allowing ambiguity to exist without using it as an excuse to withdraw. That's not easy, because ambiguity makes you feel exposed. When things are defined, you know where you stand. When they aren't, you have to stand somewhere anyway. I realized how much of my old sense of safety came from definition. Even if the definition was limiting, it gave me something to lean on. Undefined space doesn't. It asks you to hold yourself. Holding yourself requires trust, not in outcomes, in integrity. I had to trust that staying present wouldn't cost me myself, that visibility wouldn't turn into vulnerability without grounding, that openness would become imbalance. That trust didn't come instantly, it had to be practiced. I practiced it in small ways, by not pulling away when silence stretched, by not interpreting uncertainty as rejection, by not shrinking my presence to manage discomfort. Each time I stayed, something strengthened. Not the connection, me. I realized that visibility isn't about being seen. It's about being available. Available to respond honestly. Available to feel without retreat. Available to let moments matter, without demanding they lead somewhere. That availability felt risky, but it also felt clean. Clean because it didn't require performance. I wasn't trying to appear confident. I wasn't trying to signal detachment. I wasn't trying to control perception. I was simply there. I noticed how much fear tried to disguise itself as reason. It told me that pulling back would restore balance, that staying visible might create pressure, that it would be smarter to conserve emotional energy. Fear is persuasive, especially when it sounds reasonable. But reason without honesty is avoidance. With better language, I asked myself what I was actually afraid of, not in theory. In practice, I was afraid of being misunderstood, of caring more, of staying open longer than was reciprocated, of having to walk away later knowing I'd been fully present. Those fears are real. They're also unavoidable if you want something meaningful. Staying visible doesn't guarantee safety, it guarantees truth. Truth means that if something ends, it ends honestly, not through drift, not through misalignment disguised as timing, not through avoidance disguised as maturity. I wanted honest endings more than safe ones. That realization anchored me. I also noticed how staying visible changed how I related to time. Before, I was always measuring how long something had lasted, how long it might continue, how much longer I should wait before adjusting my behavior. Now, time felt secondary. Presence became primary. Presence doesn't watch the clock. It inhabits the moment fully. That didn't mean I lost awareness. It meant I stopped negotiating with it. I also realized that staying visible didn't mean giving everything. It meant giving accurately. Accuracy became my compass. If I felt warmth, I didn't cool it artificially. If I needed space, I took it honestly. If something mattered, I didn't minimize it. Minimization had been my quiet escape. I stopped using it. Staying visible also meant allowing myself to be impacted. That was new. Before, I'd listened without absorbing, engaged without integrating, present without vulnerability. Now I let moments register. I let words land. I let silence mean something without rushing to explain it away. That kind of openness changes you. I felt softer, not weaker, more human. Human presence doesn't guarantee control. It guarantees connection, even if that connection is temporary. Temporary doesn't mean meaningless. I also saw how staying visible required boundaries, real ones, not walls. Boundaries aren't about distance, they're about clarity. I didn't overextend myself. I didn't abandon my needs. I didn't collapse into someone else's rhythm. Visibility doesn't mean self-erasure. It means self-respect without armor. That balance took attention, but it felt right. I realized that courage isn't about big moves. It's about refusing to disappear in small ways. Refusing to become they. Refusing to go quiet when honesty is available. Refusing to retreat when presence is possible. That refusal is subtle. but it reshapes you. I don't know where this leads. I don't know if staying visible brings closeness or clarity. I don't know if it deepens or concludes what exists. But I know this: I'm no longer willing to trade authenticity for comfort. Staying visible might change everything, or it might simply reveal what already is. Either way, I'll meet it fully here. Not hidden, not guarded, not halfway out the door. That's the quiet courage I'm practicing now. Not because I'm fearless, but because I'm done disappearing from moments that matter. And once you choose that, you realize something important. You were never meant to live unseen. You were meant to live unseen. You were meant to live honestly. That's what I'm doing now, even when nothing is certain. Especially then, what remains? When you choose presence over protection, there's a moment that comes after you've stayed visible long enough. Not a climax, not a resolution, a quiet realization. The realization that protecting yourself is no longer the same as honoring yourself. That's the moment I reached. For most of my life, protection was my strategy. I protected my emotions by keeping them manageable. I protected my heart by staying reasonable. I protected my sense of control by never letting anything get past a certain depth. It worked. I stayed intact. I stayed functional. I stayed untouched. But untouched isn't the same as whole. Choosing presence over protection didn't happen all at once. It happened in a series of small refusals. Refusing to shrink when something mattered. Refusing to soften my truth to make it easier to carry. Refusing to disappear when uncertainty made retreat tempting. Each refusal felt subtle. Together, they changed me. I began noticing how differently I moved through moments. I wasn't bracing anymore. I wasn't waiting for things to go wrong. I wasn't scanning for signs that I should step back. I was in it. Being in it doesn't mean being reckless. It means being available. Available to feel fully. Available to respond honestly. Available to let moments affect you without needing to control the outcome. That availability is what I used to fear. Because availability removes your armor, and armor feels safe. Until you realize you're wearing it everywhere. I started understanding that my old idea of protection was built on avoidance. Avoidance of disappointment. Avoidance of imbalance. Avoidance of caring more than was reciprocated. Those are valid fears. But avoiding them also avoided something else. Death. Death doesn't promise safety. It promises truth. Truth about what you feel. Truth about what you value. Truth about who you become when you stop minimizing yourself. I realized that protecting myself had slowly turned into protecting my patterns. Patterns of independence. Patterns of self-containment. Patterns of leaving before anything could rearrange me. Presence challenged those patterns. Not violently. Gently. It showed me a version of myself that didn't rely on distance to feel grounded. A version that could stay open without losing coherence. A version that didn't need control to feel safe. Meeting that version of myself changed everything. Because once you know you can live that way, going back feels like erasure. I also noticed how much lighter things felt emotionally. Not because uncertainty disappeared, but because I wasn't fighting it anymore. Uncertainty is heavy when you resist it. It's manageable when you accept it. Accepting uncertainty didn't mean surrendering to chaos. It meant releasing the illusion that certainty was a prerequisite for honesty. Honesty doesn't wait, it lives in the present. I stopped asking myself how this would end. I started asking myself how I wanted to live inside it. That shift changed my entire orientation. I wasn't rushing toward anything. I wasn't stalling either. I was inhabiting each moment fully, without bargaining. That's what presence looks like when it's real. I also realized that presence doesn't guarantee closeness. Sometimes it brings clarity instead. And clarity isn't always comfortable, but clarity is respectful. It doesn't mislead, it doesn't distort, it doesn't leave people guessing where they stand. I wanted that kind of respect for myself, for her, for whatever this was becoming. Choosing presence over protection also meant accepting a new definition of strength. Strength wasn't distance anymore. It was steadiness. Steadiness in how I showed up. Steadiness in my tone. Steadiness in my tone. I didn't oscillate between closeness and withdrawal. I didn't perform interest and then disappear. I didn't send mixed signals to protect myself from vulnerability. I stayed consistent. Consistency doesn't demand anything. It simply reveals truth over time. I also noticed that presence sharpened my boundaries, not weakened them. When you're present, you feel misalignment sooner. You don't overextend. You don't collapse into hope. You don't confuse availability with obligation. Presence keeps you honest with yourself. I could feel when something nourished me. I could feel when something drained me. I could feel when I needed space. And take it without disappearing. Protection used to be my way of creating space. Now, space could exist inside presence. That was new. And freeing. I realized that protecting myself had once been necessary. There were times when distance saved me. I don't deny that. But this wasn't one of those times. This time, protection was costing me more than presence ever could. It was costing me aliveness. Aliveness doesn't scream, it hums. I felt it in the way my days felt fuller. Not busier, fuller. In the way moments lingered after they ended. In the way silence didn't feel empty. In the way I stopped feeling like I was waiting for life to begin somewhere else. Presence brought me here. I also realized something quietly profound. You don't fall this deep to be saved by someone else. You fall this deep to meet yourself without armor. That meeting is terrifying and liberating, because once you meet yourself there, you stop settling for half experiences. You stop calling avoidance peace. You stop mistaking safety for fulfillment. Choosing presence over protection didn't give me answers. It gave me alignment. Alignment between how I feel and how I live. Alignment between what I value and what I tolerate. Alignment between who I am internally and who I am internally and who I allow myself to be externally.